to justify one over the other pretty easily. So I think in some ways where we've gone with some of this is just us saying like, okay, I really like that guy, or Josh going, I love that guy. You know, a perfect example is uh, 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 is Spinner, right? Josh loves
Top
Spinner, and
spin, yeah.
I can't go there with you, man. I just can't. You know, so we argue about stuff like that, where it's like, oh, and like he's like, we gotta do Spinner. And I'm like, let's pick this guy instead. So we have to have those conversations, you know. And so when you're talking about Mad Bubbler, the Astro Monster, or the moment I would name any of these other names, it's because they're top of mind because they're coming. So I can't use those names, you know, and be like, oh, okay, well, what about that guy? So there's a bunch of cool stuff. I mean, Snow Meow is a perfect example of something that I think at one point we do want to try to get to. It'll probably have to be more of a crowdfundy kind of thing, but you know, you run into this sort of the hesitation for me is like, okay, I go, if I'm going to make a Snow Meow, the only people that can buy a Snow Meow are people that already have Snowman of Hook Mountain. So I'm already starting with a very small, certain size group of people, you know, and how many of those people are going to cross over? Is that enough? And there's just, is that enough to justify it? So it'll probably end up having to be sort of like, even though it's not, you know, this big, and it would still have to be this big, it would still have to be some sort of like a crowd-funded Snow Meow, rather
That
than
makes
like what
sense.
we did with Mandoran or Electrocharger. You know, it's like I'm selling you that figure, and or maybe I should say, hey, if I'm making Snow Meow, you can also buy Snowman of Hook Mountain again. But
Yes.
I mean, I haven't been to eBay this week. Like, can you still buy Snowman of Hook Mountain, or is he expensive on the secondary market? I don't know.
I haven't seen
You
it.
know,
I don't. I just look at
if I
mine.
find if huh?
I just
That's
have
the
a
whole
look at
thing.
mine.
It's like, you know, I also have to be cognizant. Like if I go and go right now on Entertainment Earth or Big Bad Toy Store or Diamond or Alliance, you can buy a Snow Meow for $55 still, or 65. I can't remember if he was 60. He was 55, I think.
55, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, if you can still buy him from those people, then there's no reason for me to remake him. But if it's like, no, he's gone and you can't get him, should I make it available? It becomes this complex web of how often can you release something? What do people already have? What are they willing to pay for? What do they not need? Also mixed with how much does it cost to simply get a tool back into a machine and get production running again? And you know, there's definitely hurdles that you have to get over just to get the thing started. It's sort of like the analogy. I'm going to say this analogy because I know it, but 99% of the people have never run a printing press. But the cost for printing anything is not the cost to print it. The cost is to get the machine running. Like you've got a giant 4-color press with inline varnish or whatever. I mean, they're like 200 feet long. Get them up, get the color balance, get everything right. That takes an hour. And you burn through 10,000 sheets of paper to print 1,000. The cost for the ink on the paper is actually negligible, but the cost is just getting the machine up and running. That's where, so same thing here. Like there's an inherent cost to just getting the tooling out of the tooling thing, you know, wrenched up with cranes, pulled over the machine, launched in the machine, getting the plastic in, getting it to the right temperature, getting it melting properly, and getting it going. That part takes sometimes, if it's a small run, just as long as actually making the toy. And then you got to take it out, clean out the machine, take out all the plastic. Like that part ends up becoming half the hurdle sometimes.
Yeah, the process remains the same. It's
Yeah.
whether you're doing 1 or 10,000, you still have to get it there.
There's a question here. I'm surprised you haven't asked me because I
Oh,
got asked
yes.
a whole bunch on social media about it, but you didn't ask. I'm very surprised.
What haven't I asked yet?
I got asked by many people on social media, why is Jaga wearing a belt? And why does the Ghost Jaga
Oh,
have
I
a
know
belt?
why. I know. I don't know. I don't see why people, because there's two versions of him in the cartoon. In the cartoon, there's a section where he's got the belt on, and there's a section where he doesn't have the belt on. So that was quite obvious.
Yes,
Maybe
he's
it was obvious to me.
wearing it when he fights Groon in the Star of Thundera.
Yes, that's part of the
There you go.
episode.
I had a lot of people ask me. They were like, "Why has he got a belt? Regular Groon didn't have the belt. I mean, regular Jaga doesn't have the belt."
Yes. Yeah. Well,
See,
then they need to go and rewatch. Sorry, Brian. I'm familiar with that episode. I recognized it immediately when you showed it.
I was ready. I was ready because people had prepped me on social media, and then you just left me in the cold because you're just too much of an expert, Eggman.
No. Well, now we know. I'm so sorry, Brian. I need to go and ask around what people want to know. It's fine. Listen, Brian. I carrying on where we were. Like with the back to the Mad Bubbler. Now, obviously, this is a character that made bubbles. Do you think that some of the Thundercats characters could fit in some of your other product types? Like you've got the Super Soapies. Would that be something that a shape like the Mad Bubbler would work for, or something like a Super Cyborg? I mean, you just did the Krang android body. Is there something that Thundercats could fall into on those other lines?
I mean, it's not that I'm opposed to it. It's just more when and where it makes sense. Like to a degree, Thundercats has more vehicles and elaborate play sets than most of the other lines that we're making. You know, we say that, and you're like, all right, well, what about Krang? It's like, well, they got a turtle van, and but they don't have a play set, and they don't have this. Like, I think it's usually more like doesn't really make sense. The Soapies are a whole different beast because that's more of a labor of love than anything else. Like, you know, this isn't one of those things where people are like, oh, wow, you know, hey, I love those. You know, you're kind of talking to a very small audience of people that were like, nope, I collected the monster ones. I love them. They're wacky and they're weird. And they're almost people that collect these are very close to the people that collect like advertising figures and stuff like that. You know, it's a different crossover, but it crosses over really heavily with monster collectors. But outside of that, I'm like, if I made a Lion-O like this, I think a lot of people would just be like, not sure I need that. But that could be just me. I could be very
that makes sense. I understand your reasoning.
Very wrong. And so it's like I'll push monsters into here where Thundercats, it's like, no, they need a play set, you know, a giant play set. Where for Universal Monsters, do you need a giant play set? There's not really an iconic play set for each one of them, you know?
You can leave the tomb for Mamra. We'll do the pyramid and all of that for Mamra.
Yeah. You've mentioned this before, you know?
Yes.
I'm not
I'll bring it up again next time.
I will bring it up every time. I will bring it up multiple times today.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Talking about, I just talked about the Krang's body. So I know you mentioned recently that with Turtles, you are going to do 2003 Toon ones in the near future.
Yes.
And we've touched on the 2011 Thundercats a while back, but you've moved from cartoon to toy, and then the same with Silverhawks. You've offering cartoon versions, and then also the vac metal toy versions. Is this something that you might, with Thundercats at the moment, you've got both the LJ and the cartoon versions. Would you introduce a third version if you feel that you are done with a certain aspect of the line, that you're retiring the toon side of it, for example?
I think if we felt like that there was a huge groundswell for that and people were like, we really want those, we don't have those. I think right now, at least the feedback I get is that there's still so many Thundercats characters that haven't been touched yet, like core 80s characters, that's where we should be staying for now. But I'm not opposed to it. I just think that right now there's still so much to do in the classic, animation that has not been touched.
Oh yes, there's quite a lot of characters. I mean, there's so many episodes with one-off appearances. So there's like lots and lots.
There's so many characters that you think of as being very ancillary, and then when you go back, you're like, no, this guy was everywhere, or this gal was everywhere, and you're like, how did we wait so long to make this one? And I think that I think there's going to be a couple of those where people are like, yeah, why did that take so long?
Well, talking about the future for Thundercats, now you dropped a massive bombshell with our last interview, announcing that Tiger Sharks is joining the ranks in
Yes.
Q1 of 2025. How is things going with that? Have you started anything yet? Was it only next year?
We've got preliminary concept stuff, but I mean, obviously, it's a ways away still. But gonna get some tiger sharks one of these days.
Okay, and will it follow the same formula of waves of four?
Yeah, that's how we're planning on doing it. Yes.